Hi again. Let's continue talking about React and React Native in particular. And in our last video, I left off and I'd kind of done this. I'd modified the text and added a button at the bottom there. And we talked a little bit about components. Let's talk about Flexbox. So Flexbox is a system that we're going to use to lay things out, to arrange elements on the screen. Okay? Flexbox is a standard CSS system, right? So you can use that in React Native, but it also works in HTML. And so if you're familiar with Flexbox, then all the same rules apply here. Okay, there's a couple edge cases where things are a little bit different, but essentially everything you know from the HTML world applies to the React Native world with Flexbox. And for people that don't know Flexbox, let's talk about it right now. So right now you can see I've got a view with the style container on it, right? And so that's these styles here, okay? In React Native, when you give an element a flex of 1, it expands to fill the space, okay? So this container object is sort of the root object, right? It's the parent for these other elements, right? And when we give it a flex of 1, it expands to fill the container. So it kind of like this object here starts at the top, goes all the way to the bottom, and then stretches the width of the screen. Let's give it a background color. It's right now the background color is white. Why don't we change it to some other color, right? And there we can see it, right? What if I give it a flex of 0, right? When I do that, it doesn't expand to fill the height. Okay, and if I take flex off, this is the same thing, right? So if I do that, you can see it looks the same, right? So flex of 1 says that something should expand to fill the space, okay? Next, this align items property says how items align on the cross axis, okay? And justify content says how items align on the main axis. Okay, in the view that we have here, it isn't spelled out, but in the view that we have here, the main axis is column. So imagine there's an invisible line that runs from the top to the bottom of the screen, right? And this is the main axis that we're going to align things on. So if I say flex direction column, so I'm going to make that the single quotes just so it's uniform, right? That is the same as what we had before, right? So flex direction column says that everybody's arranged on a column, okay? If I switch this to row, it's not really going to work with the example here. It looks a little weird, right? Really what's happened is all of the text objects are aligned horizontally, so some of them are over here and some of them are off the screen on the right side, okay? Because they're aligned in a row, okay? If I change this to column, then they're aligned vertically here, okay? So this is our first text object, this is the second text object, that's the third one, and then we have the button at the bottom. So that's all of these, right? Okay? The cross axis is how the items align against the main axis. So if our main axis is vertical running top to bottom, the cross axis is how they align on that vertical line, okay? Right now the align items property is set to center. Okay, so justify content says like how they align on the main axis, and they're aligning at the center of this main axis, right? So they're squished together in the middle on this vertical line, right? The align items property says like how do they align on that line? And if I set this to flex start, then they align on the left side, and if I set it to flex end, they align on the right side. Okay, let's put it back to center. Okay, for justify content, now this is the cross axis, right? And if I want to align items on the main axis, I'm going to set the justify content property. Okay, so justify content right now is set to center. If I set it to flex start, the items align at the start of the main axis, which is the top of the screen. Because remember, we're on a column, right? If I set it to flex end, then they align at the bottom of the screen because that's the bottom of our column, right? The bottom of the main axis, right? And if I wanted them to start, like let's say at the upper left here where they're aligned on this side, but at the top of the screen, I'd use justify content to set them to the top, and then I could set align items to flex start, right? And then they would start in the upper left, okay? I'm going to switch that back to center, and let's talk a little more about justify content. So another feature with justify content is that we can set how items are spaced out along the main axis. So remember, our main axis is column. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to say, let's spread the items out rather than concentrating them in the center of the screen like this. Let's spread them out across the screen, and we can do that with space around. That's it, space dash around like this. Okay, so what space around says is that everybody's going to align on the main axis, which is a column in this case, and that we're going to divide up the extra space and put a little bit on either side, or put the space around the elements that we have. So each one of these elements has a little bit of space at the top and the bottom, right? And there's space at the bottom there at the last element, right? Okay, another option here is space between. Okay, so if you choose space between the first element and the last element, which is hidden underneath this warning right here, right? The first element and the last element go all the way to the edges of the column, okay? And all the space goes between the elements, right? So that's space between. Let's switch this back to space around, right? And there we go. So that's like a quick introduction to Flexbox and how you'd use it with React Native. And just a note, right, when I'm setting these properties, these flex properties of align items, justify content, and flex direction, normally you'd also do this. You'd say display flex, right? So in HTML, usually you say display flex. If you give an object a flex value, like so you say flex of 1 or flex of 0 or something, right? Then that kind of assumes that it's flex. But a lot of times you'll see this too. You'll say display flex, right? And when you're doing that, what you're doing is you're saying that this element container, right? That's this guy, right? Because he's got the container property, right? This view is going to arrange its children, right? So it doesn't affect any elements that are nested inside the child elements, right? But the child elements are now flex items, and they get laid out and follow the rules set for them by the parent. So the children here of container are going to be laid out using the rules on container for align items, justify content, and flex direction. Okay, so anyway, there's a quick introduction to Flexbox and how you might use it. I'll do some more in another video, but that's like just the beginning, right? So thanks for watching.